Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on embedding the ethos of SMCR and how to deliver genuine cultural change. My name is Lucinda Carney, and I'm going to be host for this afternoon. I can see there's still people arriving, so I'll just do a brief introduction as they do. We've got a full webinar today, so everybody is most welcome. What we've done just to keep this running as smoothly as possible is we're muting people as they arrive so that it doesn't take away from the actual presentation itself. And we're also going to record this. So if there's anything you miss and you want to refer back to it, the recording will be available if you wish later. As I said, my name's Lucinda and I'm the CEO and founder of Actus. My background is actually HR. And it's interesting that we've found ourselves to be working in the SM&CR space. This actually came about 18 months ago, where a client, well, a potential client at the time, approached us because we were in the performance management space, and they basically said that they needed a solution for both performance management and SM&CR, and they could see that they were very, very aligned. That was the start of a journey. We're now well established with these guys, and we've been working in this space for 18 months, as I say. And what's most interesting to me, and I think the purpose of this webinar, is the fact that the senior management and certification regime has presented a situation where HR and compliance really need to work in partnership. And the FCA have been very clear about the fact that the purpose of the whole regime is about engendering the right behaviours, the right culture. It's not about a tick box. So the key is, how can we work together with our colleagues, whichever hat you're wearing, and make sure that we are using this as a tool to drive value, regulation, but also maybe bring extra value to the performance management process. Now, if you have any questions, please do feel free to enter them into the chat box. And my colleague, I've got a colleague sitting next to me who hopefully will flag to me, because I don't always see them when I'm presenting, if there's any questions you want me to answer as we go through. And equally, I'll open up to questions at the end. I anticipate that this webinar won't take much longer than about half an hour. So hopefully you can have your sandwiches at your desk if need be, but it won't take too long. Just out of interest, though, before I go on to my opening slide, if you get a chance to type into the chat, I'd be very interested to understand whether we've got an HR or a compliance audience predominantly. So why don't you just type in what role it is that you're coming from, so I'll have an idea of the hats that people are wearing out there. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Dipti, for kicking things off. So I'm going to keep going, and I'll keep an eye on this and see where people are coming from. It'll get me a sense of the sort of things that are going to be of interest to you. So webinars are notoriously difficult for getting people to interact. So we'll see if we can get a little bit of interaction again. So thank you, you guys who are typing actively into the text box for me. When I actually ran this presentation a couple of times face to face, and it's good to get people thinking. So we've got many firms on here, many representatives on this call. I'm interested as to, I guess, why you're here. What do you think SM&CR might do to affect your firm's culture? So little or no change, it's just another piece of legislation. Let's face it, there's been plenty of that coming around lately, hasn't there? Do you think it's going to be just another set of tick boxes that people moan about? Are you here because actually you know that your senior managers are nervous and they're coming to look to you for assurance on their behalf? So is it about that in terms of the culture, is giving them confidence and support? Or do you think this is an opportunity to improve accountability and behaviours throughout the firm? So if you imagine my bullets there are 1, 2, 3, 4, you can choose more than one if you like. I'm intrigued as to what you think the impact of SM&CR might be for your particular firm. And I'll give you some moments to just choose whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 or a combination. Great. I'm good to see some people, quite a few people are saying 4. So you are seeing that this is a great opportunity to improve accountability and behaviours generally through the firm. A couple of 3s coming up as well. Yes, absolutely. And I have noticed that there's a lot of that. I think particularly maybe the core firms that we've been working with, I think perhaps they've thought that it's easy to manage on a spreadsheet, and I know there's lots of toolkits and things out there, but as the senior managers are starting to go through the training and realise actually that they are, you know, it's their heads on the block, I think they're starting to get nervous, so they're definitely looking to have support from compliance. That's what we're hearing from our clients very much. Yes, yeah, and another set of tick boxes. Let's face it, people do like to moan about tick boxes, and unfortunately, compliance and appraisal is sometimes accused of being a tick box. So what we'll look at in this conversation is how we can maybe minimise that and bring the quality to both processes. Great, so thanks so much for contributing there. I'm going to move on to our next slide. So as I alluded to earlier, and I'm sure all of you know on this call now because we've been quite familiar with this, the FCA are looking for us to embed true responsibility and accountability through the embodiment of the senior management and certification regime. And we need to be able to evidence that we have done that as firms, and as individuals with responsibilities, we need to be able to evidence that we've met those responsibilities. And an evidence isn't necessarily just a kind of tick or an evidence of maybe someone signing up to a job description, having a signature against it. That's not the same. That's not showing that we've got true responsibility and accountability. We need to see greater evidence than that of us bringing those responsibilities to life in the organisation. And obviously that in turn should raise awareness and improve the behaviours that drive risk. I'm sure we all know why we are here and what brought the certification regime around. It is about minimising risk and damage that's happened in the marketplace back that led to the crash. They want to see consistency and high quality around background checks, certification, and also conduct. So it's not just about those people who've got the responsibilities, it's about making sure that this is firm-wide in terms of these new behaviours and the awareness of how to manage risk. And very importantly, they want to see that you've got an embedded control process around risk management. And that's where I think it can be quite challenging, because making this come to life means doing it on an ongoing basis. Again, if we've got something like an Excel document, we can capture information, but it's not necessarily a process. And you know, if a new person comes in or that process isn't adhered to, it's not maintained, it's really hard if we were approached by the FCA to say who was in a certain role when a breach occurred, for example. It's quite difficult for us to be absolutely certain, right down to the point in time of when something's happened. So we need to make sure that we've got processes that are going to ensure that our data and our tracking of the responsibilities and evidence is always up to date. So with that in mind, let's look at the process in here. And I suppose just before we go into performance management as a process, which of course is hopefully an established process in your organisation now, or if it isn't, then this may be the key to ensuring that you feel that you've got rigour around your SM&CR process. Perhaps it's worth having a think about where you are in relation to the two processes. Now, on these slides here, I won't necessarily get you to type in, but you can if you wish. Many people now, I think, have moved on. Obviously, you're on this call from an SMCR point of view. I'm assuming that you've done your mapping, most of you, and you're probably getting to that point where you've got your roles sorted and you're starting to think how to manage things. Well, let's hope you're at that stage, because obviously the deadline is looming. On the left-hand side is thinking about the performance management process. So maybe if you could type in the box here where you are in relation to this. If you are at stage 1, you actually don't have a performance management or process on an ongoing basis established. Maybe type in 1. If you've got appraisal, but it's perhaps paper-based, it's once a year or something, so it's still not necessarily ongoing, type 2. And if you've got something where people are doing regular one-to-ones, maybe they're meeting 3-4 times a year for different reasons, then type in 3. And that will just give me a sense of where you are culturally in relation to your performance management process. I'm just waiting for a few comments to come through. Just type those into the comments. Okay, so I'm seeing this as a mix, yes, and actually I'm seeing a lot of 2, and that's what my experience is actually from the clients that we've been dealing with. So a lot of you've got an appraisal, an annual activity taking place, but it's possibly not a well-embedded process. There are some 3s coming through, which is great. So if you've already got a well-embedded performance appraisal process, you've got something to hook the SMCR process into. So wherever you are, this next slide hopefully will help you in terms of maybe broadening out your existing appraisal process, if that's what you've got, or if you've got a well-embedded one, it's how do you slot the SMCR process into it. And the real case I'm making here is, why create a totally new process for SM&CR so you've got two things taking place in parallel, and compliance are managing one track and HR are managing the other, when you could combine the two together and give them both more impact and have a greater impact overall on the business. So that's what we're suggesting here from this slide. This slide is an adapted version. As I said, we work in the performance management space originally, and we have always advocated the value of ongoing performance management. And for the benefit of our mixed audience out here, and forgive me, those of you who already know this, it's very clear that ongoing conversations with ongoing goals and objectives and feedback is the best way to deliver high performance from people. Therefore, a once yearly appraisal process, particularly if it's a bit of a tick box so people feel like they're going through the motions, is not very effective in driving high performance. So what we would always advocate is, actually from a performance management point of view, it's great to break down that cycle into different touch points so that it's not just a once year 3-hour painful experience. You can divide it up over the year into maybe 3 or 4 meetings where people are talking more regularly, and therefore they're staying on top of things, and it makes the conversations and the performance more realistic. So we would advocate that anyway from a performance management point of view. However, what we're suggesting with relation to the senior management and certification regime is that you can give that extra meaning by incorporating it into your performance management process. So the upside for you, if you're in compliance, is you've already got an existing performance management process that is being managed by your HR colleagues probably, and therefore you can ensure that the conduct and the certification is captured on a regular ongoing basis. So that's great. But the other positive I see is that where we're talking about behaviours in relation to SM&CR, this is an opportunity for you to actually develop people in line with them. And to ensure that culturally your firm really is taking them seriously by incorporating it into the HR process. So just explaining this image here, at the start of the financial year, we know that we should be setting performance objectives. Now that's a really great thing, therefore, is that could be the point at which you either assign responsibilities or you agree, make sure that people are checking that their senior management responsibilities that they've had allocated to them, they're clear about them because it's part of their role. And if they want to delegate, or if they want to add extra granularity, they might choose to assign other objectives or responsibilities to people in their team. So this allows you, and actually it's a way in which the senior managers can protect themselves, because as we know, let's say you're a core firm or an enhanced firm, there's only a small number of people at the top of the organisation who have the accountability for these responsibilities in the FCA's eyes. However, on a day-to-day basis, there are other people who are discharging those responsibilities, and they may not have visibility. Now, given the change in the regime, which means the people at the top are the ones who are going to be ultimately held accountable if something goes wrong, then they want to have visibility of how those responsibilities are being managed further down the organisation. So that's where you can use performance objectives, for example. You might categorize them as compliance, but you can encourage people to think about it as one whole. Now, there'll also be their regular objectives like sales performance or customer focus. Any of those would also be there, but the compliance or the SMCR responsibilities could also sit within those areas in terms of meeting them. Now, we talk about regular one-to-ones. That comes as said, that's just good management practice. But the next point at which we would recommend in a performance management cycle is where you might meet, let's say at the end of the first quarter, to talk about development. Now, personally, my background, as I said, is HR. It's actually learning and development, and I used to find it quite frustrating that we would wait until the end of the year to do an appraisal, and only then we'd talk about people's development. It used to feel that that was the wrong time, because surely we should be giving people development in order to help them to perform. So I advocate having a conversation earlier in the year so we can look at our responsibilities or our objectives and identify, is there any development that I need in order to be successful? So that would be true for performance management. Now, if we then add in SM&CR, Well, obviously, people have a responsibility to update their continuing professional development. This is a great time for them to plan to meet the requirements that they need, but also to ensure that they've got things scheduled or they update the professional development that they've done. And the other aspect, as you go into future years, to me, is that if you've identified during a certification conversation that somebody has them developed around their the conduct principles, for example. Now, it isn't really an option for you to say that someone can't be certified unless you are formally disciplining them. We know that, and that's a risk of, to me, of the actual SMCR process, is that although we're actually expecting to certify people against specific behaviours, and the same with the conduct conversations, let's say customer, we might identify that somebody has got some ways in which they could improve in relation to the way they communicate with the customer. But when it comes to the actual conduct appraisal, we don't want to mark them down, or it's not an option for us to say that they're not meeting them. Well, this is where having a conversation at a different time in the year, it would allow you to identify where people can improve so that when it does come to certification, it really is plain sailing. So we look at CPD in terms of what we need to do to meet the needs of the job, but it also might be the behaviours that are underpinning the principles of conduct and certification. We can then go to the half-year point, and this is where I would suggest if you have a process that is just once yearly, you definitely want to have a mid-year appraisal. And the reason I say that is that having worked now with a number of clients and helping them design their certification templates and their conduct templates, there is really no getting away from the fact that there are a number of yes/no questions. If you incorporate that into your end-of-year performance appraisal, I can't think of a better way of putting it, but people really will lose the will to live. So you need to split it out, is my opinion. We have our conduct. We have to have our conduct and certification templates set up. They are going to be tick boxed to a certain extent. Some of them can be done by the individual, but you have a specific time in the performance management calendar, I'd say, where you update those and go through that conduct and certification review, and you're able to go through the certification process. But it's incorporated into this one cycle. So we've done that. Now we can go back to more classic performance management, and we might look at things like career aspirations, talent management. Of course, it makes total sense that the people who have been certified or doing well in that process, you might look at them for successors or talk about where they want to go and keeping them in the organisation. And then finally, we get to the end of year review. And that's what I'm saying is more of your classic performance management review, where we look at how we've achieved our objectives, but we might also talk about behaviours. Perhaps you have a competency profile in there. So that's where you might talk more classically about performance management. I'll come back to the whole point about behaviours and competencies, because I think that is another opportunity for you to integrate SM&CR principles into your performance management process. So I'm hoping that that was fairly clear in terms of what we're advocating as a cycle. We advocate that for people who are just doing performance management because it is good practice to talk on a regular basis. But if you want to then glue those two together, then you can get a much better and more robust process. I think of it as giving the performance management process teeth and maybe giving the SM&CR certification process some heart. Please do feel free to ask any questions if you've got any. So the purpose of doing that is that you've still got, by aligning responsibilities and performance objectives, which is that first point I made, the ultimate responsibility is still at the top. But what you're doing is you're demonstrating how important compliance is. So you're really messaging it by putting it within people's performance objectives alongside their other more regular objectives. If you are incorporating it like this, you're actually going to make sure you've got increased visibility and insurance of those. So that gives confidence to those people who are the senior management functions. They know that those particular responsibilities are being met. And also, you can then use this as evidence. I'm sure you're all aware that what we need to be able to do is demonstrate that we've put in place specific responsibilities, controls and measures that allow us to demonstrate that we're meeting our requirements. So if you are doing regular one-to-ones where you're assessing how well people are meeting their compliance-related objectives, you could use that as evidence of meeting that. So the purpose of this is embedding those responsibilities into business as usual, and it's about disseminating them further down the organisation rather than just sitting at the top. And that's fundamentally a key to culture change. Let's move now. I said I'd talk to you about the behaviours. So we've got the conduct and certification, or actually the conduct rules here, just examples of those to remind us of them. And I was using the example of the customer one earlier. So these are yes/no statements, and well, or they're instructions really, that you're going to have to say yes or no if you're a manager to whether someone is meeting them or not. Okay, that is essential in terms of meeting the requirements of the regime. But as I alluded to earlier, what happens if the person has some development? If it's really quite difficult for you to, with all integrity, which was the rule number one everybody in the firm is supposed to have, so you might identify that somebody perhaps hasn't treated a customer fairly, but it's not a major breach, it's not a sackable offence, it's something that someone needs to learn from. So this is where, as I alluded to earlier, we should maybe identify development points for people so that when it does come to the conduct certification process, we can actually, we can with confidence say that they've met them. Now, the other way in which we can do this is by incorporating it into our into our values. Or if you've got competencies or values, I don't know, people out there, again, type in if you've got competencies or values. Just say yes if you have. If you do have some sort of competency or value, then what you might want to consider is giving them a refresh. Great, lots of people have. Now, my question to you is, if you've already got these values in place, do they map to the conduct regime? And if not, could you align them? So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that actually we've got a pretty standard competency value scheme that people had got, that I came across in a firm that we were working with. And you can see you tend to have something on courage, so there will be some mapping over anyway. So what we were then able to do was to map it to the actual conduct regime. So on the right-hand side, you can see that what we were able to do is actually, where we've gone bold, emphasize certain points which were linked to the conduct requirements. Now, what's the purpose of this? What's the benefit of this? Well, of course, again, what you're doing is integrating those conduct behaviours into the behaviours that you're already measuring as an organisation. On top of that, it's very likely that you're looking at those behaviours during the performance appraisal, and you may identify gaps or development areas. So the beauty of aligning like this is that at the performance appraisal time of year, that's when it is a safe time for you to identify gaps and to develop people in line with them. So if you haven't already done this, my recommendation would be have a look and see how you can align the conduct requirements with your existing values framework, maybe freshen it up a little bit, and then make sure that's incorporated within your performance management process. And that gives you a really great way of helping people to development, but really ensuring that it's embedded within your firm. So two simple concepts there, and the benefits of aligning the two processes are, in a nutshell, it's about improved visibility and dissemination of responsibilities to where it matters. So the performance management process managed well, it's about genuinely reducing risk. And if you haven't got a great performance management process, then now's the time to drive it, because this will help protect you and the business. It's an increased awareness of what good and bad looks around conduct, risk, and it gives you the space to challenge and turn around risky behaviours without having to block people from being certified. And it will give you a more meaningful and consistent performance and SM&CR management process, hopefully reducing risk, increasing performance, and employee engagement. So it's really simple concepts. I wanted to keep it simple because it's just a lunchtime webinar. If you want more information, we've actually written this up in more detail. So we've got a white paper that you can download from our resources section. The link is there. Or again, if you just want to drop an email to Helen, the lady that invited you to the webinar, she can send over a copy of it, and you can have a link to the slides if they're useful to you. One thing I haven't put on here that might be of interest to you is when we previously did this web demo, we also recorded it and turned it into a podcast. So we have a podcast series called HR Uprising. So you can search that, HR Uprising. So there's a specific podcast on this topic if you prefer to listen to information auditorily. And also those of you who are in HR, it's got a range of other HR related topics on there too, which might be of interest. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. I'll leave it on this screen. As I alluded to earlier, we are performance management by background, but we now have a SM&CR module embedded within our performance management. So if you are looking for a system to support you in this culture change, then we have a system that may be of value. Please feel free to get in touch to find out more about that. And if and to that mind, if you wanted to, we are actually running a web demo on that, where we'll actually be running through the software in a couple of weeks' time. And that's the dates. I thought the date was up here. I think it's on the 12th or 13th. Maybe someone can listen in to me and tell me when it is. On the 12th and 13th, it's a couple of weeks' time. So if you wanted to sign up for that web demo, then please get in touch and feel free to do that. What we'll do is we'll send out the link and the date for anyone who's interested. Now I'm just going to open up. If there are any questions, please feel free to type them into the entry box, and then I'll wrap up at past. So it's nice. So thank you very much, Jamie, for doing this. Right, I'm just trying to read this with appraisal. Oh, it's disappeared. Can you pick it back up for me, Chris? The question is, with appraisal monitoring, a suggestion was made to carry out a 6-month review. Would tasks or soft targets given a 12-month appraisal with a 6-month review date have the same impact? Yes. So I would, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Jamie, and correct me if I'm wrong. So if we go back to classic performance management, you really do want to review objectives at the half-year point, probably anyway. Definitely if you link performance management to pay. So if you were to review your objectives at that point, you could quick review of those. Equally, they could be reviewed at a different time in the month. So your softer targets, as in your non-compliance targets, I'm assuming. So definitely review them there, and then you can also do certification. So that would be your normal process. I would say that's good practice for performance management, as in traditional objectives. Is that the question you're asking, Jamie? Feel free to explain further, or I can even unmute you if that's helpful. But I would say certainly do a half-year point. And I think that's exactly what I'm saying here, but just be clear about what's expected at the half-year point and what's expected at different stages. So you need to, going back to my cog diagram, what you need to do is define what's expected of your organisation or of your managers at each of those touch points. So set a timetable and you say by the end of January or whatever it is, we have to have objectives set and responsibilities signed off. And then by the end of June, we expect you to have updated your objectives and to have carried out certification. So whatever the timetable is that's right for you, that's what I would recommend you define it for your organisation, and then you ensure that people meet it. Okay, so sorry, I'm just going to, yeah, I've got another question here, just trying to read it. Do I suggest linking the certification take place at the same time as the appraisal? So what I'm suggesting is that you have a cycle. Sorry, the question is a question where someone's saying, do you have a certification day? Should it be on a set day? What I'm proposing is that you have an appraisal and SMCR cycle, and one point in the year is your performance appraisal conversation, and you talk about performance appraisal and values assessment, and one point in the year it may look at objectives, smaller aspects of the appraisal, but that's where you do your certification. And I don't know whether it would be a day, but it would probably be a month where you'd set the expectation for people to have completed their certification within that window. So it's one cycle, but it's at least 2 meetings. So you're splitting out the conversations. If you don't do that, then I think what you'll find is your traditional performance appraisal will get swallowed up into a certification tick box. So remember, the purpose of performance appraisal is to drive high performance, is to deliver engagement, is to make people feel valued. It's about retention of staff. It's got a very different purpose to compliance. So that's why I believe that you need to have one cycle, but with different purposes at different times of the year. So I think that's all of my questions for now, but thank you for those detailed questions. If anyone wants to question or talk to me offline, I'm perfectly happy to do that as well. Just get in touch, feel free to drop us a line and we can have a chat. So I'm going to now close down the webinar as promised. We will convert it into a little video if you wanted to catch up on it, because I know if some people haven't attended. Thank you so much for your attention today, for joining us today, and please don't hesitate to get in touch if you want to discuss further or take advantage of any of the resources. Many thanks.